The first time my mother-in-law called me a gold digger, I was standing in her kitchen with a casserole dish in my hands. It was a Sunday afternoon. The table was set for 8 people. There were roasted potatoes cooling beside a bowl of green beans. My husband Daniel was opening a bottle of wine, and his mother Margaret was sitting at the head of the table like she had personally built the entire house. She looked at me, smiled politely, and said, "I suppose some women marry into a family because they love the man." Then she paused. "Others marry into the family because they love what comes with him." Nobody moved. I remember the exact sound of the refrigerator humming behind me. I remember the weight of the casserole dish in my hands. And most of all, I remember looking at my husband. I expected him to defend me. He didn't. Daniel lowered his eyes and said quietly, "Mom, not now. That's not true. Don't talk about my wife like that. Just not now." And somehow, those 2 words hurt more than the insult. Because that was the moment I understood something I had been refusing to see for almost 3 years. My mother-in-law wasn't the only problem in my marriage. My husband was becoming her ally. And neither of them knew that within a few months, a lawyer would place a document on a table in that same house and reveal a secret that would destroy the family they had spent years trying to protect. A secret that had my name on it. And when Margaret finally realized what her late husband had left me, she didn't call me a gold digger anymore. She begged me not to tell Daniel the truth, but by then it was too late. Because the truth had already started speaking for itself. When I met Daniel, I wasn't looking for money. I wasn't even looking for marriage. I was 32, working as a project coordinator for a small architecture firm, renting a modest apartment with terrible plumbing, and trying to pay off the last of my student loans. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I grew up in a middle-class family. My father repaired elevators for nearly 35 years, and my mother worked a public library. They taught me 2 things. Never spend money you haven't earned, and never measure your worth by what someone else owns. So when I met Daniel, his family's wealth didn't impress me. In fact, I didn't even know about it at first. We met at a charity event. I had been volunteering because my company was sponsoring the event. Daniel was there because his father's company had donated the largest amount of money. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He wasn't showing off. He was standing near the kitchen, helping an elderly volunteer carry boxes. I remember laughing when he dropped one. He looked at me and said, "Please tell me you didn't see that." I said, "I saw everything," he smiled. That was how it started. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became weekend walks. Weekend walks became something serious, A's. Daniel told me his family owned a construction company. I knew the company was successful, but I didn't understand how successful until much later. His father, Richard, had built the business from nothing. Margaret had been with him since the beginning, and Daniel was their only son. When Daniel introduced me to his parents, Richard welcomed me immediately. Margaret was polite. Too polite. She smiled, shook my hand, and looked me over from head to toe. Then she asked, "So, what does your father do?" I told her, "Elevator repair. And your mother?" "She works at the library." Margaret smiled. "Oh, just one word, but I heard everything inside it." Later that evening, Daniel apologized. "She can be intense," I laughed. "She doesn't like me. She doesn't know you yet." "I think she knows enough." He kissed my forehead. "Give her time." So I did. For 3 years, I gave her time. I attended family dinners. I remembered birthdays. I helped with Christmas decorations. I sent flowers when Richard was sick. I brought homemade desserts. I never asked Daniel about his family's money. I never asked what his parents owned. I never asked what he would inherit. And when Daniel proposed, I told him I wanted a simple wedding. Margaret disagreed. She wanted a huge ceremony, a ballroom, a designer dress, a guest list of nearly 300 people. I said no. Daniel supported me. At least I thought he did. We had a beautiful wedding with 70 guests. My parents sat in the front row. Richard cried during his speech. Margaret smiled through the entire ceremony, but when she hugged me at the reception, she whispered into my ear, "You have no idea what you're marrying into." I thought she meant responsibility. I was wrong. The first year of our marriage was good, not perfect, but good. Daniel worked for his father's company. I continued working at the architecture firm. We lived in a small house that we bought together. It wasn't in the wealthy neighborhood where Daniel grew up. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't impressive, but I loved it. I painted the living room myself. Daniel built bookshelves. We planted flowers in the backyard. For a while, it felt like we had created something that belonged only to us. Then Richard became ill. It started with fatigue. Then came the hospital visits. Then specialists. Then long conversations about treatments. Margaret became increasingly controlling. She wanted Daniel at the hospital every day. She wanted him involved in every business decision. She wanted him to move back home. Daniel resisted. But slowly, he began spending more time with his parents. At first, I understood. Then I started noticing changes. He stopped telling me what was happening at work. He started taking calls outside. He changed his phone password. He became irritated whenever I asked questions. One evening, I asked, "Are you okay?" He said, "I'm tired. Is something happening at the company?" "No." "Then why are you acting like this?" He sighed. "Not everything is about you." Emily. I froze. He had never spoken to me that way. I didn't say everything was about me. "I know." "Then why did you say that?" He didn't answer. He went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen alone. That was the first night I wondered whether someone was putting things into his head. I didn't have proof, but I knew Margaret had been spending more time with him, and I knew she didn't like the life we had built. She wanted Daniel to become someone else, someone who belonged to her world, not mine. The Sunday dinner happened 2 months after Richard's health took a serious turn. Everyone was there. Margaret, Daniel's Aunt Susan, his cousin Michael, 2 family friends, and me. I had to spend 3 hours cooking. I made Margaret's favorite chicken recipe because I knew she liked it. She barely touched it. Halfway through dinner, she looked at Daniel. "Your father has been thinking about the future." Daniel nodded. "I know. He thinks you need to take a larger role in the company." I smiled. "That sounds exciting." Margaret looked at me. "I wasn't speaking to you." The table went silent. Daniel shifted in his chair. I lowered my fork. Margaret continued. "Richard has worked his entire life to build something for this family." Daniel said, "I know. And I don't want anyone making decisions that could put that legacy at risk." I looked at her. "Of course," she smiled. "I just think certain people should understand that marriage doesn't automatically give them ownership of family assets." I felt my face become hot. Daniel said, "Mom." Margaret ignored him. "I've seen women become very interested in wealthy men." My hands went cold. "Margaret." She looked directly at me. "I think you know exactly what I'm saying." I looked at Daniel. He stared at his plate. I waited. I gave him a chance. 1 second, 2, 5. Nothing finally. I said, "If you believe I married Daniel for his family's money, you should say it clearly." Margaret leaned back. "Fine," she smiled. "I think you are a gold digger." The words landed like a slap. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply placed my napkin on the table. Then I looked at my husband. "Daniel," he swallowed. "Mom is upset." I stared at him. "That's your answer," he whispered. "Please don't make this worse." Something inside me broke. I stood. "I didn't make anything worse." I looked at Margaret. "You did." Then I looked at Daniel, and you allowed it. I walked out. That night, I slept in the guest room. Daniel never came to apologize. The next morning, I found him sitting in the kitchen. He looked exhausted. "I love you." "Love you," he said to him. "Act like it." He didn't respond. Instead, he said, "Mom is under a lot of pressure. So am I. She doesn't mean everything she says. She called me a gold digger." "I know. And you did nothing." I didn't know what to say. "You could have said she was wrong." He looked away. That was the moment I knew. Something had changed. A few weeks later, Daniel became even more distant. He traveled for work. At least that's what he told me. One Thursday evening, I was looking for a tax document in our home office when I noticed a folder on his desk. It wasn't locked. I didn't intend to open it, but my name was written on the front. I stared at it. My full name, Emily Carter. I opened it. Inside were copies of bank statements. There was an account I didn't recognize. The balance was over $180. 0. The account was under Daniel's name, but that wasn't what shocked me. The transfers were coming from an account belonging to his father's company. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. I felt sick. I took photographs of the documents. Then I put everything back exactly as I found it. When Daniel came home, I asked, "Are you having financial problems?" He froze for half a second. "No, are you sure?" "Yes." I watched his face. He was lying. I knew it. He knew I knew it. But neither of us said anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I called my father's old friend, who was an accountant. I didn't tell him everything. I simply asked whether money moving from a company into a personal account could be legitimate. He said, "It depends." "On what?" "Whether it's salary, dividends, loans, reimbursement, or something else." "What if the transfers are undocumented?" There was a pause. "That could be a serious problem." I hung up. For the first time, I wondered whether the family's accusations had nothing to do with me. Maybe they were hiding something. Maybe they were trying to make me look like the problem because they were afraid I would discover the truth. 3 weeks later, Richard asked me to visit him. He was in the hospital. He looked much thinner. I sat beside his bed. He smiled. Emily. Hi, Richard. He reached for my hand. I'm sorry. For what? My wife. I laughed nervously. She's worried. No. He shook his head. She is afraid. Of what? He looked toward the door. Then he lowered his voice. Of losing control. I didn't understand. Richard, is something wrong? He looked at me for a long time. Did Daniel ever tell you about the old property? What property? His expression changed. So he didn't. Tell me what. Before he could answer, the door opened. Margaret walked in. Richard immediately stopped talking. She smiled. What are you two discussing? Richard said. Nothing. Margaret looked at me, then at him. I stood. I should go. Richard grabbed my hand. Emily, I looked back. His eyes were serious. If anything happens to me. He stopped. Make sure you get the truth. I didn't understand what he meant, but I remembered those words as every single one. 2 weeks later, Richard died. The funeral was beautiful. Margaret looked devastated. Daniel looked broken. I stood beside him the entire time. Afterward, the family gathered at Margaret's house. There was food everywhere. People talked quietly. Old friends told stories about Richard. I sat in the corner. Then Margaret walked toward me. You should be careful. I looked up. About what? You're Richard's daughter-in-law. I know. You have no claim to what belongs to this family. I stared at her. I haven't asked for anything. You don't need to. Her voice became colder. Women like you know how to wait. I stood. Women like me, she smiled. You'll understand soon. I walked away. That night, Daniel came home drunk. He sat on the edge of his bed. Mom thinks you are going to take everything. I stared at him. Everything. The house. My shares. Dad's assets. I don't want your father's money. That's what you say now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You actually believe her? Daniel rubbed his face. I don't know what to believe anymore. Then believe the woman who married you. He looked at me. I want to. He had no answer. 6 weeks after Richard's funeral, Margaret called a family meeting. Everyone had to attend. She said Richard's estate would finally be discussed. We gathered in the library. A lawyer named Thomas Bennett sat at the table. He had handled Richard's legal affairs for decades. Margaret sat beside Daniel. I sat across from them. Thomas opened a folder. Before we discuss the estate, I need everyone to understand that Mr. Hale amended his will approximately 11 months before his death. Margaret frowned. That's impossible. Thomas's looked at her. It was signed and witnessed. Daniel asked, what did Dad change? Thomas looked at me, then at Daniel. Then he said, there are several changes. Margaret leaned forward. Just read the important part. Thomas ignored her. He began reading. Richard had left portions of his estate to several charities. He had left specific assets to Daniel. He had left personal belongings to Margaret. And then Thomas paused. The majority interest in the Hale family trust. Margaret held her breath. Has been transferred to Emily Carter. The room went completely silent. I thought I had misheard him. Margaret stood. No, Thomas continued. She is also named trustee of the family property trust. Margaret shook her head. No, that cannot be right. Daniel stared at me. I stared back. I didn't know. Thomas nodded. I believe you. Margaret slammed her hand on the table. He would never do this, Thomas calmly said. He did. Then he handed me a sealed envelope. Mr. Hale asked that this be given to you only after the will was read. My hands trembled. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, Richard's handwriting. Emily, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry. You deserve to know what happened. And I am trusting you, because you are the only person in this family who never asked me for anything. I stopped reading. My vision blurred. I looked at Daniel. He looked stunned. Margaret looked terrified. That was when I realized something. She knew. She knew there was a secret. She just didn't know how much Richard had left me. I took the letter home. I didn't read it until Daniel was asleep. I sat at the kitchen table. Then I opened it again. Richard wrote about the family business. He had discovered that money had been disappearing. Large amounts. He initially suspected an employee. Then he discovered the transfers were connected to someone inside the family. I kept reading. The person responsible was not Daniel. It was Margaret. My heart stopped. Margaret had been moving company funds into accounts controlled by her, but Richard had discovered it. He had confronted her. She denied everything. He hired investigators. Then he discovered something worse. Margaret had been trying to transfer ownership of several properties before Richard died. Richard stopped her. But he was afraid, he wrote. I know my wife. When she feels cornered, she becomes dangerous. I covered my mouth. Then I read the next paragraph. Daniel knows some of this, not everything. Richard explained that Daniel had discovered financial irregularities months before the wedding. Margaret convinced him that the money had been borrowed temporarily. She told him she would fix it. She also told him that if the truth came out, the company could collapse. So Daniel stayed quiet. He protected his mother, and when Richard created the trust, he deliberately put me in control because he believed I would protect the business from both of them. Then came the final paragraph. Emily, if Daniel chooses his mother over you, don't blame yourself, I cried. Not because I had inherited anything. Because Richard had understood me better than my own husband. The next morning, I confronted Daniel. I put the letter on the table. He read it. His face went pale. You knew, he looked at me. Some of it. How much? I knew Mom was moving money. How much? He didn't answer. Daniel, he whispered. About $400,000. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. And you said nothing. I was trying to fix it. You were trying to protect her. Yes. You let her call me a gold digger. He looked down. I know. You let her tell everyone I married you for money. I know. You knew she was stealing from your father. He covered his face. I was scared. I stood. You weren't scared of losing me. He looked at me. You were scared of losing your mother. He didn't deny it. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me. Did you know about the trust? No. Did you know Dad planned to leave it to me? No. Why? He shook his head. I don't know. I looked at him. I do. He stared at me. Your father's trusted me, Buzz, because I wasn't part of the game. Daniel began to cry. I had never seen him cry like that, but I couldn't comfort him, not this time, because I had spent years comforting a man who never protected me when I needed him. Margaret didn't accept the will. She hired another attorney. She claimed Richard had been mentally incompetent when he changed the documents. She claimed I had manipulated him. She claimed I had isolated him from his family. The accusations became vicious. Then she did something I never expected. She called my parents. She told them I had stolen millions from the Hale family. My father called me immediately. Emily, what is going on? I told him everything. He was silent. Then he said, Your mother and I don't care about the money, I cried. I know. We care about you. Those words nearly destroyed me, because I realized that all this time, I had been fighting to prove to people that I wasn't after money. But I didn't need to prove it. Not to my parents. Not to myself. And certainly not to Margaret. The truth was enough. The court process began. Thomas produced additional documents. One of them was a financial audit. Another was a recorded meeting between Richard and Margaret. I didn't know the recording existed. Neither did Margaret. In the recording, Richard asked, Why did you transfer the money? Margaret replied, Because this family belongs to me too. Richard said, That doesn't give you the right, she answered. I built this life with you, and I never denied that. You're leaving everything to Daniel. No. A long silence. Then Richard said, I'm leaving Daniel enough to live well. Margaret asked, And what about Emily? Richard answered, Emily gets control of the trust. Margaret laughed. You're giving my family to a stranger, Richard said. She has never treated you like a stranger. Margaret's voice became cold. She'll leave Daniel, Richard replied. Only if you make him choose. The recording ended. Margaret's attorney to suppress it. The judge allowed it. The room went silent when it played. I looked at Daniel. He was crying. For the first time, he finally understood. His father had seen everything. And he had known exactly what Margaret was doing to our marriage. Still was a mystery. The old property Richard had mentioned before his death, Thomas finally explained. Years earlier, Richard had purchased a large piece of land outside the city. It was worth millions. He had placed it in a separate trust. Margaret had tried to sell it secretly. Richard stopped her. The property was not simply valuable. A major development company had been negotiating to purchase it. The offer was enormous. And the person who would control the sale was me. I stared at Thomas. You're saying I control a property worth millions? Yes. Why would Richard do this? Thomas smiled sadly. Because he knew you wouldn't sell it just because someone offered you money. I looked at Daniel, he whispered. Dad always said you were the only person who didn't look at him like he was a bank account. I didn't know what to say. Then Thomas handed me another document. It was a letter from Richard. The final sentence said, If my family wants the money more than they want each other, let them learn what that choice costs. Margaret's entire strategy collapsed. The relatives who had supported her suddenly became silent. People who had called me selfish stopped answering her calls. Aunt Susan came to my house one evening, she cried. I didn't know. Didn't know what. How bad it was. She told me Margaret had been borrowing money from several family members. She had promised them that once Richard died, she would control the estate. She'd promised Daniel would become CEO. She had promised everyone something, and she had lied to everyone. Aunt Susan looked at me. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "I appreciate that," she asked. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the documents on my desk. I don't know. That was the truth. For the first time in my life, I had more power than I wanted, and I didn't know whether I wanted to use it. Daniel moved out. Not because I asked him to, because he said he needed to understand who he was without his mother controlling him. 3 months passed, we barely spoke. Then one rainy evening, he came to my house. He stood at the door. He looked different, thinner, older, humbler. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. I didn't answer. "I don't even know if you should." Still, I said nothing, he continued. "I spent my entire life believing protecting my family meant protecting my mother." He swallowed. But I finally realized I was protecting her from consequences, not protecting my family. I looked at him. "What do you want, you?" I shook my head. "You don't get to say that like nothing happened. I know. You let her destroy my reputation. I know her make me feel like I didn't belong in my own marriage. I know. You knew something was wrong and chose silence." He nodded. "I was a coward." I looked away. As he stepped closer, "I can't undo it. No, but I can stop lying." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "I gave my attorney permission to cooperate with the investigation." I froze. "Against your mother?" "Yes." "Daniel, I finally understand what Dad meant." He took a breath. "He told me once that family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people you refuse to betray." I felt tears in my eyes. Richard had said something similar to me. Maybe Daniel was finally becoming the man his father wanted him to be. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and love isn't the same as trust, so I told him. "If we ever have another chance, it starts from zero." He nodded. "I'll accept that." I saw Margaret one final time at the courthouse. She looked exhausted. Her attorney stood beside her. She looked at me, then she walked toward me. "Emily." I didn't respond. She lowered her voice. "You've won." I said nothing. "You have the trust." "Still nothing. You have the property." I looked at her. "And?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Daniel," I finally understood. She wasn't talking about money. She was afraid of losing her son, I said. "You didn't lose Daniel because of me." She stared at me. "You lost him because you made him choose." She looked away. "I was protecting him." "No," I spoke calmly. "You were protecting yourself." She started crying. For a moment, I felt sorry for her. Then she said something I never expected. "I was afraid." I nodded. "Of what?" "That Richard loved you more than he loved me." I was stunned. "You were jealous of me?" She laughed through her tears. "He respected you. That doesn't mean he didn't love you. He stopped trusting me." I didn't know what to say, she whispered, and I couldn't stand it. For the first time, I saw Margaret not as the villain everyone had made her into, but as a frightened woman who had spent years destroying everything she was afraid of losing. That didn't excuse her, but it explained her. And sometimes understanding someone is the final step toward letting them go. The development company made another offer for the property. It was more than enough to change my life. Daniel asked me what I wanted to do. I said, "I don't know yet. I could have sold everything. Bought a mansion, quit my job, traveled the world, proved Margaret wrong. But that wasn't what I wanted. Instead, I created a foundation. A portion of the property proceeds would support affordable housing projects. Another portion would go toward scholarships, and some would remain in the family trust for future generations." Daniel asked, "Why?" I said, "Because your father didn't leave me money. He left you control, yes. And you don't want the money. I want to use it for something meaningful." He smiled. "That sounds like you." I looked at him. "I hope so." Almost a year after Richard's death, I received one final letter. Thomas mailed it to me. The envelope was old. Inside was a short note. "Emily, I don't know whether you and Daniel will remain together. That decision belongs to both of you. But I hope you understand something. You were never chosen because you're my daughter-in-law. You were chosen because you were the only person who treated me like a human being instead of an inheritance. Never let anyone make you feel guilty for having integrity. Money can reveal character, but it can never create it. I hope my family learns that before it is too late. Richard," I cried when I finished reading. Then I folded the letter carefully. I placed it in a wooden box beside photographs of my parents and my wedding. Not because Richard had left me wealth, but because he had left me something more valuable. The certainty that I had been seen. A year after the court case, my life looked completely different. The family business survived. The financial investigation led to legal consequences for Margaret. Daniel eventually returned to the company, but he didn't become the man his mother had wanted him to be. He became his father's son. He rebuilt relationships slowly, including his relationship with me. We didn't rush. We went to counseling. We had difficult conversations. There were days when I wondered whether love could survive betrayal. Some days, I thought the answer was no. Other days, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him. The difference was that Daniel stopped asking me to forget. He started asking me what I needed. That changed everything. We didn't go back to the marriage we had. We built a new one, a more honest one without secrets, one without pretending that family loyalty meant tolerating abuse. And Margaret? She eventually left the city. She moved to a small coastal town. We rarely spoke, but one Christmas, she sent me a card. There was no apology, no accusation, just one sentence. "You were never the gold digger I thought you were." I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled. Not because she finally believed me, but because I realized I no longer needed her to. People often ask me whether I regret marrying Daniel. The honest answer is complicated. I regret the years I spent believing that keeping peace was more important than telling the truth. I regret every time I stood silent because I didn't want to create conflict. I regret every time I allowed someone else's insecurity to make me question my own worth. But I don't regret loving, and I don't regret learning. The biggest lesson I learned is that family can be used as an excuse for almost anything. She's your mother. He's your brother. You have to forgive. You have to keep the peace. You can't embarrass the family. But family loyalty should never require you to betray yourself. If someone truly loves you, they won't ask you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. They won't humiliate you and call it honesty. They won't manipulate you and call it protection. And they won't demand your silence just because the truth makes them uncomfortable. For years, Margaret believed I wanted her family's money. The irony was that when I finally received control of everything she had spent years fighting over, I discovered that none of it was what I had wanted. What I wanted was simple. A husband who stood beside me, a family that respected me, a home where I didn't have to prove I deserved to belong, and eventually I got all three. Not because I inherited them, because I learned to stop begging for them. I learned to walk away from people who only valued me when I was useful to them. I learned that sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's becoming so whole that what they did to you no longer controls your life. And perhaps the most important lesson of all came from Richard. He had written, "Money can reveal character," he was right. But I would add one more thing. Asterisk power reveals character too. Margaret had power and used it to control. Daniel had power and spent years hiding behind fear. Richard had power and used it to protect what mattered. And I was given power I never asked for. The choice was mine. I could use it to punish everyone who had hurt me, or I could use it to build something better. I chose the second. Because revenge can feel satisfying for a moment, but peace is something you get to live with every morning. And after everything I had survived, that was the inheritance I wanted most. Not the house, not the money, not the company, not the property. Asterisk myself. And for the first time in my life, I finally understood something Margaret never did. You cannot steal someone's worth. You can only convince them to forget it. And I had finally remembered mine.